Behind the sparkling diamonds and luxurious mansions, do the wives of mafia bosses truly live in paradise or in hell? They have everything most people dream of, yet they pay the price with their freedom, constant fear, and secrets that can never be spoken. In the eyes of the public, Emma Coronel always appeared like a star who had stepped out of a glamorous world. The wife of the notorious drug lord, Joaquin El Chapo, Guzman was not only recognized because of her marriage to one of the most powerful men in Mexico's underworld, but also for her youthful beauty, elegance, and the luxurious lifestyle she showcased. On social media, Emma drew attention with her lavish designer outfits, high heels worth thousands of dollars, and sparkling jewelry adorning her neck, wrists, and ears. She was not just El Chapo's wife, but was often referred to by the media as the narco queen. From extravagant parties and luxury vacations to public events that attracted cameras, Emma always shined. Even when El Chapo was captured and put on trial in the United States, she attended court in high-fashion attire, as if to prove that, despite her husband being shackled, the Guzman family's image remained powerful. Behind that display was a life closely tied to the wealth and power of the Sinaloa cartel empire. Emma had everything: mansions, luxury cars, bodyguards, and a privileged position within the underworld. To many, this was an impossible dream, a young woman surrounded by wealth, respect, and glamour. But the truth was never that simple. If glamour was the velvet curtain, then behind it lay a suffocating darkness that Emma could never escape. Being the wife of El Chapo, one of the most brutal and infamous drug lords in history, meant she had to live constantly under the shadow of fear. At any moment, police, military forces, or rival gangs could storm in. Emma's life was not a series of peaceful days, but endless nights filled with anxiety and vigilance. When El Chapo was arrested, the media relentlessly pursued Emma's image, yet few thought about her loneliness as she straddled two worlds. On one side, the luxury her husband created; on the other, the looming threat of collapse. She was accused of helping El Chapo in various ways, delivering secret messages, facilitating drug shipments, even aiding his daring escapes. Such allegations made her life even more suffocating, because a single testimony, a single piece of evidence, could have sentenced her to decades in prison. Emma's presence at El Chapo's trials was both a symbol of loyalty and a testament to tragedy. The woman who once enjoyed life as a queen now sat in the defendant's chair, facing American justice. When she was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 2021 for assisting in the Sinaloa cartel's operations, the glamorous image vanished, replaced by the weary face of a woman behind bars. That was the moment darkness fully consumed Emma Coronel. What makes Emma Coronel's story so dramatic is not only the contrast between glamour and darkness, but also the war raging within her mind. On one hand, Emma loved El Chapo, the man who lifted her from a provincial beauty queen to the throne of the underworld. She publicly declared her devotion to him, despite the accusations of murder, brutality, and global drug trafficking he faced. To Emma, El Chapo was not merely a cartel boss. He was her husband and the father of their twin daughters. But on the other hand, Emma understood that love came with an unbearable price. She had no freedom of choice, because the power and terror of the Sinaloa cartel consumed her entire life. Leaving was not an option. Walking away from El Chapo could mean betrayal, and in the world of the mafia, betrayal was a death sentence. Staying meant accepting a life of fear, risking imprisonment, and facing the collapse of everything she knew. Her psychological conflict was evident in the way she presented herself publicly. In courtrooms, she sat upright, smiling softly, her eyes proud, projecting an image of a woman unrepentant. But behind the flashing cameras lay sleepless nights of solitude, where she contemplated the future of her daughters, a broken family, and her own survival now that El Chapo was locked away for life. Emma Coronel's story is a modern tragedy. It illustrates that the life of a mafia boss's wife is never purely glamorous or purely dark. It always exists in contradiction. They are given everything: money, power, respect, but are stripped of the most fundamental things: freedom and peace of mind. Emma embodies that paradox, at once a queen and a prisoner. Looking at Emma Coronel, one can clearly see the paradox of a mafia wife's life: glamour as a golden cage, dazzling yet confining. Darkness always lurks behind the curtain, and psychological turmoil never ceases. To the outside world, Emma had it all. But to herself, it was perhaps too great a sacrifice, trading her entire life for a love she could never escape. When speaking of John Gotti, the Dapper Don or the Teflon Don, most people think of expensive suits, flamboyant public appearances, and the image of a mafia boss bold enough to challenge the U.S. federal government. But beside him for more than 4 decades was a woman who rarely sought the spotlight, yet carried her own aura, Victoria DiGiorgio, his loyal wife. At the height of Gotti's power, Victoria embodied the image of a refined lady. She wasn't loud, nor did she chase the headlines. Instead, she maintained a quiet but unmistakable authority. She lived in lavish mansions, drove luxury cars, and enjoyed every convenience that millions of women could only dream of. The media often described Victoria as the mysterious shadow behind one of America's most ruthless mob bosses. She had an elegant fashion sense, always appeared polished, and carried herself with a calm composure, as if the investigations, bloodshed, and violence reported daily in the news had no bearing on her world. That was the glamorous facade, the wife of a mafia boss wrapped in money, power, and prestige. Yet behind the surface shimmered a darkness Victoria could never escape. Being John Gotti's wife meant she was chained to the mafia world, where every day was a gamble with life and death. Even if she was not directly involved, Victoria lived with the constant dread that police raids or enemies seeking revenge could strike at any moment. The greatest pain she endured, however, didn't come from external threats, but from within her own family. The Gotti household was never a normal family. Their children grew up in the looming shadow of their father, surrounded by whispers of blood, violence, and dirty money. Victoria watched her son, John Gotti Jr., follow in his father's footsteps into the mafia, only to face trials and prison sentences of his own. Her deepest heartbreak came in 1980 when her youngest son, Frank Gotti, died in a tragic minibike accident. For Victoria, that wound never healed. The neighbor responsible for the accident later disappeared mysteriously, with many believing John Gotti had him killed. From that moment on, Victoria knew her life would always be intertwined with blood and vengeance. The darkness deepened during the years of Gotti's trials. Although the press nicknamed him the Teflon Don for escaping conviction multiple times, his luck ran out in 1992 when he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. From then on, Victoria's world collapsed into isolation. Her husband locked away, her son entangled with the law, and her family forever branded with the mafia stigma. What makes Victoria's story so gripping is the lifelong psychological conflict she carried. On one hand, she remained a loyal wife, never publicly abandoning John Gotti. For decades, she quietly supported him, visited him in prison, and defended his image against the harshest critics. To many, she was the epitome of unwavering devotion and love. But on the other hand, Victoria endured unrelenting pain. She saw her family destroyed by the very world her husband had chosen. She lost a son in tragedy, watched others sink into crime, and lived with the stigma of being the mob boss's wife. She could never walk down the street without hearing whispers, "That's Gotti's wife." Her mind must have been tormented with questions. Was her love and loyalty worth the terrible price she paid? Staying meant living with the darkness consuming her life, while leaving meant betrayal, a choice nearly impossible in the mafia's world. This conflict was most evident in Gotti's final years. As he lay dying of cancer in prison, Victoria felt both sorrow and bitterness. She mourned the man she loved, yet she carried the anguish of knowing he had not left her a peaceful home, but a legacy of loss, shattered children, and a broken family. Victoria DiGiorgio's story is a living testament to the paradox of mafia wives. They are handed everything: power, money, prestige, yet deprived of the most fundamental human needs, freedom and peace. Victoria herself was never a criminal, yet she lived like a prisoner, shackled by the choices of the man she loved. On the outside, she appeared resilient, graceful, and loyal. But inside, she was a woman scarred by personal tragedy and family ruin. Glamour, darkness, and psychological conflict, these three forces intertwined into a haunting symphony of blood, tears, and forced smiles. Looking back at Victoria DiGiorgio's life, one truth is undeniable. Being the wife of a mafia boss is never just about wealth and power. It is a gamble, a role no woman truly chooses, yet one she cannot escape. The glamour is only a veil, behind it lies endless darkness, and within the heart is a battle that never ends. Victoria, the wife of John Gotti, will always be remembered not just as the wife of the Teflon Don, but as the tragic emblem of countless other women entangled in the mafia's web, women who were queens in name, but prisoners in reality. In the golden age of Prohibition in Chicago, Al Capone rose as the symbol of power and extravagance. The infamous Scarface appeared in tailored suits, Cuban cigars glowing in his hand, and wild parties overflowing with bootleg liquor, jazz, and luxury. But few noticed that behind this notorious figure stood a quiet presence, May Coughlin, the wife of Al Capone. May, with her simple beauty and gentle face, was often described as the model of a dutiful wife. To outsiders, she seemed like the silent lady of the house, surrounded by the wealth and glamour her husband provided. She lived in a grand Palm Island mansion, had servants, luxury cars, and every modern convenience of her time. To the public eye, May embodied the dream, married to one of America's most powerful and wealthy men. But that shining surface was nothing more than a fragile shell. Behind it lay a darkness May could never escape. May Coughlin's life was a constant struggle with fear and isolation. Capone brought her gold, luxury, and status, but along with it came blood, violence, and enemies who never rested. The lavish home was no sanctuary. It was a fortress where she waited anxiously for the unexpected knock at the door, the sudden crack of gunfire in the streets, or the lurking eyes of rivals. May never took part in Capone's operations, but she couldn't escape the consequences. When her husband ordered the massacre of dozens of rivals in the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929, the entire nation recoiled in shock. And in her silent mansion, May surely understood that every dollar in their safe was soaked in blood. Her marriage grew cold with distance. Capone, notorious for his affairs and constant absences, often left May alone while he pursued business or pleasure elsewhere. Violence was not only on the streets, but seeped into their home. May, fragile and quiet, swallowed her pain, forced into silence to maintain the public image of the good wife. If Al Capone was the infamous Scarface of Chicago, May Coughlin was his stark opposite, a woman erased by her husband's monstrous shadow. She never sought the press, never joined the blood-stained parties, and never had any say in his empire. Instead, she poured herself into caring for their only child, Sonny, who was born partially deaf. For May, motherhood was the one flicker of light in her dark world. She devoted herself to protecting her son, hoping he could escape the bloody legacy of his father. Yet even that fragile hope seemed impossible, with the constant presence of the mafia looming over their lives. During Capone's imprisonment for tax evasion, May visited him faithfully, quietly enduring humiliation. She never betrayed him, never publicly denounced him. But her loyalty only tightened the invisible cage around her. She was no longer May Coughlin, she was only the wife of Capone. May did not die by bullets or in gang wars like so many connected to the mob. Her tragedy was quieter. She was remembered as the image of a gentle, dutiful wife, loyal, patient, and endlessly suffering. A woman who lived and died in the shadows, overshadowed by a man who left her a legacy of blood and sorrow. The story of May Coughlin reveals the harsh truth. Not every mafia wife lives in glamour. Many, like May, are prisoners in their own lives, forced to play the role of the perfect wife while silently enduring pain. The wealth, fame, and power of Al Capone could never heal the invisible wounds carved into her heart. In the mafia world, women like May never get to choose their roles. They are background figures in the grand tragedy of crime, silent, broken, and forever trapped under the shadow of a name that terrified the world. The lives of mafia bosses' wives are defined by a bitter paradox. On the surface, they walk in the glow of glamour, diamonds, silk, mansions, and lavish parties. To the outside world, they appear wealthy, proud, and powerful, basking in the shadow of their husbands' empires. Yet behind that shine lies invisible chains, the constant fear, the unspoken secrets, and the lifelong sacrifice of maintaining an image that was never truly theirs. They may look like queens to outsiders, but deep within, they are prisoners, trapped in love, bound by loyalty, and crushed beneath the heavy weight of the mafia legacy. It is not freedom they live with, but a destiny with no escape. And so the question remains, is the glamour truly worth the darkness they must endure for life? Or is it all nothing more than a gilded cage, dazzling to behold, yet locking away their souls forever.